everyone for joining the LoFi 27 meetup. You'll notice some little changes, and I'll get into those in a second. Uh, Thanks always to our speakers. We have a wonderful lineup again. Rashid can't make it today due to an emergency, and Mauve will be speaking instead of him. So, what is new with LoFi? Well, we have a brand new website. And directory and a homepage, and we're professionalizing a bunch of things. And if you notice, we've also launched sponsorships, and that's something that we're excited about as we go on and try to create an enduring movement that can challenge the cloud first architectures of today that are siloed, super spinner heavy, and let's make a warm, engaging community for everyone. Thank you to our fabulous sponsors that have accepted to jump on board. A couple of updates. Me and James are going around the globe doing sync events. The next one coming up is in July 1st in London. So Tuesday, show up. Please join us. I'll drop the link to the chat if you're in the vicinity of London. Uh, there's been a lot of conversation around are some sync providers local first? Should local first and sync split? All of that is nonsense in my opinion. We're all here together to create something beautiful for users so they can have a better internet experience. I think providers have got us a lot of wins in reality, which is so much harder than just like aspirational movements. So we owe them a great deal of like thanks and encouragement. Lo-Fi will remain a home for sync and local first, and that is how we will continue to operate. It's a welcoming community. We understand demanding local first ideals to be confirmed and wanting those things. We strongly encourage anybody building in local first, and we'll do our best to give them a leg up, to be visible, to get customers and get the word out. I wake up every day for the vision that Martin Kleppman and the team at Ink and Switch have laid out, not just for instant apps, but user ownership and all the other ideals like the long now. Surprisingly enough, Pocket, which is something that I've used for over a decade, it's a bookmarking app. They broke up with us with a CSV. So they basically, here's a link for you to export all your bookmarks, and that's it. There's no like other story around it. So the long now is something that I'm excited about, and maybe even fork Pocket and rescue it a little bit. I'll share more if we end up going that route. Uh, the other item is hackathons. Rashid has done a good job hosting the first local first hackathon, and we will be trying to do one more in the second half of the year. And it'll be like sync local first, and we'll have some ideas around doing it an all day. We've had a few requests for that, and later second half of the year there'll be another sync SF, and we're trying to coordinate a sync New York by having in real life kind of community and activities. We hope that we'll be able to have people not just build cool apps, but also make friends along the way. And I think that is the unique winning strategy for the lo-fi movement. And I'm proud to say I've made an impact by getting you guys all together. So let's keep it up and let's keep it going. But you're not here to kind of hear me wax off about all of these things. So let us get over to our speakers. First up, we have James. Gotten to know him, I think about 3 years now. Hey, we should celebrate our 3-year friendship. He'll be talking to us about this sync stack. They've been doing some really cool things with TanStack, Electric SQL, and the likes. And thank you for being our sponsor as well. Over to you. I don't know if I can. There we go. Stop screen.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me. Yeah. And yeah, I wanted to continue, I guess, a little bit on some of the stuff you were saying there in the intro. Um, and I particularly wanted to talk about this idea of a sync stack. So I guess the concept of a stack is that it's not just one particular technology. And when you think of something like Jamstack, okay, maybe Jamstack is kind of JavaScript stacks. But it's not like it's one framework so it's a kind of pattern. It's like an architecture.
Getting a little feedback saying
And
the audio is a little bit lower. If that's something you can change or get closer.
need to push just a bit louder, right?
Yeah,
Does that help at all?
yeah, perfect.
Cool. Yeah, sorry, I'm hiding in the attic. I've lost my office. So my audio setup is not quite where it was. Uh, so yeah, coming back, this concept of a sync stack, and it's about building applications on sync. And when it comes to a relationship with local first, which Yonzi was just alluding to, it was one of the main questions of the panel at Local First Conf recently is like, what is the relationship between these concepts? And I think the answer is kind of fairly obvious, right? Because if you look at it, sync is a component, it's a technology component of a local first stack, right? And that's how Martin Kleppmann sees it. And kind of actually, if you look across all of these local first platforms, if you take like a kind of purist one, like say Jazz, like they got a bunch of really cool stuff above the sync engine to make a really good end-to-end local first developer experience or user experience of people using apps built with Jazz. But at the core of the platform, it is still fundamentally a sync engine. And so for me, when I used to talk about local first, I always approached it as a state transfer technology. It's like, how do you get the data from the front end to the back end and vice versa? And it was always then about what does that mean for the quality of the user experience of people using local first apps and the developer experience of building them. And you had these canonical examples of things like Figma and Linear, but these kind of references for what are cutting edge apps and how we want to build software has just been changing really rapidly over the last kind of year or so. And so you have Figma kind of morphing into something more like Lovable, where in a way the utility of what's possible with AI and agentic systems has just sort of jumped past and trumped the kind of more nuanced considerations around usability of the previous generation of, say, sort of collaborative SaaS systems. And you can see this just kind of playing out in real time. Like this is just a screen grab from the YC startup directory of just like if you scroll down like the however many companies in the current batch, it's all vertical AI agentic stuff. Like so every SaaS vertical at the moment is being reinvented, and like every market for enterprise software and pretty much kind of all businesses are looking at being reinvented. And so there's this real land grab for human resource spend. And so you look right the way across the economy and you have all these teams and departments and like, is it 50%? Is it 80% of these floors in those buildings that are just going to disappear? And so to capture that opportunity, like these new AI and agentic platforms are then swinging back towards becoming collaborative and multiplayer and these more usability concerns. It's like if this is how we're actually going to get work done, then obviously we're going to need to be able to collaborate on it. And if you're trying to sell in software to those opportunities to replace the current generation SaaS systems, well, then they're going to need to provide the same kind of collaborative, multi-user, team-based features that the existing systems have. And so if you sort of bank that kind of general context of what's going on in the world and then focus on, right, so how do you actually build these new type of collaborative, multi-user, multi-agent platforms, you see when you get into the details that it is basically just all about sync. So this is a multi-agent, multi-user chat app that we've built on Electric. It's one where you have the shared state that the users and the agents are collaborating on is just tasks in the form of a to-do list. And so you have one agent on the right, which is told to create and monitor a to-do list. And then you have an agent on the left, which is told to make a project plan. And as they're generating it, the user navigates on the right-hand side to see the to-do list. And so you have this thing where the to-do list, which is the state, it needs to be live and it needs to be up to date and it needs to be in the cloud for the agents and it needs to be in the devices for the users. And so with this example app here, you can then have the left-hand agent is told to distill the plan into tasks and add them to the list, and the agent on the right detects the tasks, and when it finds them, it starts performing them. And so as you can see, you have these agents and users that are all collaborating on the same state. If the agent completes a task, the user needs to be able to see, and if the user deletes or pauses a task, the agent needs to know. And so, like, this is just a kind of glimpse of like the where software is going, and this type of software system, multi-user, multi-agent, is new, right? So as an industry, we don't have the same heritage history in patterns that we do for traditional point and click software. Like, this stuff is not your grandpapa's software, right? It's actually very different stuff. It's different control flow. There's different imperatives. So actually, like, how you want to build, what's important when you're building the software is a bunch of new stuff. And there's a bunch of new concepts and a whole new vocabulary, stuff like agent memory and context engineering and tool calling, etc. And a lot of it is kind of bollocks because it does just boil down to data in the database. But a lot of it is also real, right? And these patterns are being worked out as we speak, right here, right now, at the moment. And we're seeing the results being surfaced into applications, for example, like this. This is Phoenix.new, which was recently released. It's a very cool new agentic coding IDE. And because coding is the best use case for agents right now, like, this architecture and stack for these types of coding systems is the best pointer for the architecture of wider agentic systems that's coming next across a much broader set of use cases. And so, I mean, this is a space that we're playing in and learning about with Electric. Like, so for example, we've been collaborating on adding sync into Phoenix, which is the framework that Phoenix.new is based into. As Jans mentioned, we've been integrating sync into TanStack, which is what a lot of these mainstream AI platforms and YC startups are using to build their systems. And we've been putting PG Lite, which is our WASM Postgres, into coding sandboxes. So, for example, you can spin up database backed infrastructure in these vibe coding platforms without needing a database. And so there's a whole bunch of interesting stuff behind each of those projects. Like, you can see there's a post on our blog at electricsql.com just about this database in the sandbox. If you go to tanstack.com/db, or if you just search for phoenix.sync, it's on the Hex docs, the standard Elixir docs. But these projects are out there, and check them out because there's a lot of good stuff there. But I didn't want to go into too much technical depth today. I wanted just to stay a bit higher level and talk a bit about the concepts, because we're very much not the only ones doing this, right? And there's so many cool, interesting people doing stuff in this space, and it's moving so fast. And the key thing that we're all seeing is that you can't build these types of applications without sync. If you come back to something like Phoenix New, like, what's happening here is you're seeing like the preview of the code, the message thread. There's an inbuilt headless Chromium browser, which is actually showing you the application. Everything's working together in real time. You've got kind of gen server agentic loops running in the cloud. You've got like 3 or 4 different interfaces all there straight away in the browser. And it just has to be real time. Right? There's just no way that you can take a piece of software like that and sensibly approach it and say, I'm going to build this on ad hoc or imperative data fetching. It's just not an option. And so what you really need as a developer to make these systems is a sync stack. And in a way, the point I want to make is just that this is a huge opportunity for local first and this ecosystem, because it moves the world in our direction. There's this enormous economic disruption and an opportunity for a next generation of software. And then there's actually this huge practical imperative to build it on what is the core architecture of local first. And so if you come back, for instance, to the first local first conference last year, this was Jack McCloy's message, right? He was trying to get across the idea that local first is actually going to be bigger than you think. And I think it is important that we understand it, because, as I say, there is this massive shift, and it's the core tech behind local first that is at the core of this next generation of software. And so these are the kind of ideas that we're exploring behind this concept of sync. And one of the things we're doing is we're organizing a conference around this in San Francisco in November. So this is on the 12th of November. This is a spin out from Local First Conf. It's going to cover everything from the tech, the evolution of the tech, to the way it's being used today, how it's transforming product development today. And as Jonathan was saying, we're organising the Sync meetups. So we have Sync London on the 1st of July, the Sync New York coming up, and hopefully we can keep putting on a bunch of these events. I think there's like about 5 spots left for London. So if you're interested in it, it's a good time to jump on. So this is my message, right? Is that as we were saying up front, there is this like, what is the relationship between sync and local first? And sync, in a way, it doesn't have the same ethical aspects as local first, data ownership, privacy, the sort of full 7 ideals in the manifesto. But it is actually extremely interesting in its own right. Like the tech, the history, the evolution, the impact that it's going to be having from here. And it is genuinely the on ramp for mainstream adoption of local first. And we have this huge opportunity with this shift that's happening in software at the moment to move the world in our direction. Thank you.
Like always, a fan of your talks, James. That was wonderfully put. Yes, the like sync versus local first story needs to stop. This is in no way to tell consumers to reduce their demands for local first. We need to all keep asking for local first solutions without commercial kind of benefits and demands flowing from consumers. It'll be very hard to kind of build these somewhat impractical architectures that allow user ownership, but that I personally really want. And it's up to us to create that demand, that intervention, and back to the irrational man is the one that moves the world forward. I will strongly encourage everyone to keep going at it. Uh, James, if you don't mind, stop sharing. I will get George in
Yeah,
next.
sure. I mean, I don't know if is there time for any questions
We'll
or
do
any
Q&A
discussion on
at
it,
the
or
end. That's usually how we run
okay,
them. If you
let
have
me
to
just
run,
drop off here then.
we can do your session right now.
All good, yeah.
Next up, we have George. I love the like design elegance in what he's built, and we'll have him kind of tell us what he's been up to. And over to you, George.
Thank you. Thanks again for inviting me.
Of
To
course.
be fully frank, I did not expect this, although I'm extremely new to local first. What it's my like 4th month here or something like that. But it just happened that I managed to build an initial version. Then I found your small gig here, and then that made me build the second version of the software from scratch. So no, just as a small introduction about myself, I come from a long-standing line of user experience professionals. I've done it for almost 27 years, almost 20 years now, actually. And at some point in time, I switched to software engineering because I wanted to also build software. And here we are at this point in time. Now, I'm a bit older. I'm about 48 years old almost. Maybe some of you do not really remember a time where you didn't hide any kind of cloud whatsoever. Because, I mean, let alone speaking of internet, as far as I'm concerned, when I was building websites, first time, I didn't even had a computer. All I had a book, a piece of paper, and a pen. And the book was HTML 4.0 by Mike. I forgot the other name. It's been a lot, many years ago. So I was kind of learning this way, and a lot of the software that I had was either on floppy disk, like 2.5 inches, or at some point in time we upgraded to CDs, and this was for me and my world. Take it from here, put it there. So basically, it's local first. You have the software, you install it on your machine, and then you use it. There's no sync with anything. You are the owner, of your data. So moving fast forward, we've seen where we are today in this insanity that's called cloud. Everything is on cloud. And it had some benefits, but it also had some dangers. While I was building this new software, I saw some people complaining that, for example, Notable or other kind of software, they literally deleted their work, and there is no way to recover it. It was some mishappening within the database architecture. Something happened, and the data got lost. And of course, people kind of started to cry, but who's to blame? The company because they didn't do a proper job at some point in time, or the user because he got too compliant and too used to having everything somewhere in the cloud, and it's not his responsibility. So back in January, because I was at the end of my last contract, I decided I want to learn something else. And I had this idea that what if we go back in time and we build something based on current technologies without any kind of cloud, and we get back ownership and privacy. So you can see in the screenshot, this is the application landing page. If you click on start writing, you will gonna end up to this part. Now this is the first. It's not even the first version. This is actually the second version. The first version I had to build it from scratch. I'm sorry, the first version I did something interesting with it, but I realized also the problems. So let me break this in a couple of points. Why local first is better, in my opinion. As I've said before, as far as I'm concerned, it's a question of privacy, data control, and ownership. If the cloud screws up your data, it's done. If you don't have a backup to it, you're done. If you do care about privacy, cloud is not an option for you. So that's the end goal for me. When I built this application initially, I built it for myself because I wanted to see how far I can stretch the limits of using the browser and do as much of the things in the browser and not on a server. Funny as it is, I gave it to a friend of mine to test it. He gave it to his wife. He said it's amazing. She's a writer. She wants to use it. I said, okay, here's the copy. She made a local first installed server exam whatever, and she was using that. And then she gave it to other users like, hey, we like your application. Why don't you build it forward? So I started to have a small community around it. So the software actually is basically community driven at this point in time. Of course, I had my ideas, but people came and said, "What if we do this? What if we do the other part?" Now, there's also a question of efficiency. By efficiency, what I mean, basically, when you're running your software on a hosted server and you have to run operational servers, of course, there'll be some data transfer and other operations. So that would mean costs for you. Also, your benefit with local first is less complexity. So if you reduce, you don't have a database online. You don't need automation, any other thing that are tied within the cloud services. So that's good. Now, the second part would be planning make or break. Why did I rebuild the first version, which was working just as well? So for once, the biggest problem that I was faced with local first is that the lack of documentation is real. I felt like I'm stepping in a new territory and I don't know what I'm doing because really there is a lack of documentation. Thanks to Jonas here and other people like him, now documentation is starting to get somewhat ramp up. But for local first, you have this kind of a problem. Now, in my case, after building the application, I realized there are at least two huge problems. The first problem is that I wanted this application to run well on mobile devices, on tablets and desktops. Granted, on desktop you have at your disposal a powerful CPU. That's not an issue, and lots of RAM. But on the mobile device, you do not really have. So that was the first mistake I did. And the mistake is I used IndexedDB for storage within the browser, but the problem is I stored everything in just one table in one entry, so the entire application was there. Of course, no mistake. And of course, if you run this on a mobile, what's going to happen? High CPU cycles, battery drains very fast, and also the systems might get sluggish. So On the second version, I built the entire database and I split it in an amount of other tables. So basically, for example, if you look at the application right now, you can see the prologue or introduction or chapters. All of these have independent tables. For example, if I am to look in the application part, I'm just gonna zoom in a bit. You can go to IndexedDB part, and then you can look and see how I actually split the application. Now you can see there are lots and lots of tables, and this kind of presented an option to not kill the mobile device quite as fast. The second advantage is that now I can query the exact data table that I need on very specific page. This application is meant for people to write books, and also sometimes they also need images, and that means it's a lot of megabytes running behind. So what I'm doing, I'm loading on any page the data that I need, and I'm offloading everywhere else the data. So this, kind of alleviates some of the problems and the limitations also within the browser, because browser has access to the, RAM from the device, either being a tablet, mobile, or desktop, but to a certain point. So not overkill it, then I just load and offload data. So that's kind of solve the biggest problem. So I said it's a huge step forward. Not only that, but I gained a huge increase of speed. For example, now, even if a chapter has like 120,000 words, which I've tested, we're talking in milliseconds. I was just like under 30 and sometimes 19 milliseconds read and write, which was a huge thing for me. The second case, which was quite difficult for me to envision when I started, because I said lack of documentation, and then I was not quite very far off of pre-planning. Here's the problem with the local first. You have a database which is version 1. The user start using it, and it saves the data. In my case, I chose to use JSON format because it's easy to import it in other software. If my software for some reason dies out, you can literally put that JSON into any text editor and just copy the data, and you're done. But then I update the software to version 2 of the database. The user comes back and imports the database version 1 with the book, with an older book. That kind of creates a problem. Now, Dexy, which I'm using with IndexedDB, is smart enough to update some things. The only problem was that he's not able to do this automatically. What you need to do is to build separate function to check the book when it's imported, which version it is, then make a separate migration outside of Dexy, preparing the data migration, and then feed it to Dexy to actually do the last update to version 2. So given these two, let's say, huge problems, set case 1 with performance and case 2 with the database problem, I decided to rebuild the application from scratch. And this is what I'm working right now on version 2, which is basically this one, which is going to have a lot more improvements based on what initially I kind of said. Better performance, it kind of alleviates these issues with the versioning between the databases version 1 and version 2. So far so good. Now, besides these constraints, depending on what you're going to use, and this is my advice to you guys. Some of you may use React, others may use Svelte, whatever it is. What it's going to come down to is look into the actual performance and how much CPU cycles consume, because this is what is going to really impact the performance in mobile devices, especially. So it's going to drain the battery. It's going to do some other overkill, especially if the user has multiple apps running behind the scenes. And then do not forget about the data migration. Like I said, for this particular case, you have version 1, and the user, the application updates to version 2, and user imports back the book, which was version 1. So if you are careful about this, you can actually be safe with it. So I managed to do a lot of things with the browser, basically everything, including exporting. And I've done heavy duty stuff like PDF export, which is not yet released. I haven't done some stuff with RTX files exports, and I'm planning to do other heavy duty things specifically on browser alone. Now, for the last point would be, what is the future of package local first session? I know there is this desire to have sync. Some of the users complain that, they kind of wishlisted. What if we have a sync? And I said, it's no problem at this point in time. You can do sync. Save your book, put it in a Google Drive, open it in your mobile and sync. That's no problem. But I'm going to introduce also an automated one, which they just want to be able to log into their Google account or iOS account and just have some kind of sync data with the JSON, and that's fine. But the way I'm looking at things and what is the future, I foresee it like this. I think we are very, very close to eliminating the necessity to build native applications any longer. We are getting close to the age where the browser is going to be the only and the solely interlayer to run any kind of application. If you look nowadays, for example, if you have a PWA application, which is progressive web application, sometimes, which is quite obfuscated, and a lot of people don't know, in the right side of the browser somewhere, you can see a small button. It says detach application, run it locally. And it's basically taking that application and it's making like an install application in your desktop. And you can see that link in your desktop. So you don't even need to open the browser, just double click that and it opens. This works well up to a certain point. Of course, browser extensions is another way. The problem at this point in time with browser extension is that Chrome does it differently, Firefox does it differently, and is a war among these companies, which doesn't benefit any of the users, to be honest. Then you have this option with desktop wrappers, which I was kind of thinking, like Electron, Tauri, and Capacitor. Capacitor would be the best one because if you've done the one version of the code, then you can just export for either mobile or desktop or tablet, regardless of the operating system. So that would be a good one. Of course, the last part would be static solution, which means it's basically the use case I was saying at the beginning of my talk. Some people wanted the application, I gave it to them as a build, and they just install it on a local server and they run with it. So what I was trying to build eventually was a database knowledge to see how I can only use browser for any kind of software development I'm doing. In terms of the kind of application that usually people run, and I'm not talking about gaming, although I've seen some crazy stuff with gaming done in browser only. Then the second is how I can offload the largest majority of operation in the browser and the local machine and not on any server, and restrict the server for only one particular thing. Very heavy duty run applications like AI, or just simply do a sync. So this would be my personal target. Now for the future of my application, I'm just going local first as hard as I can with all the things that I said. Now the second version will be probably launched at the end of the month with lots of improvements. And I'm hoping I can introduce also maybe sync options, automated sync options, maybe later down the road. As a final note, I would say diving deep within the browser ecosystem and the way you need to build software only using browser, it kind of changes a bit the mentality. You need to think a bit differently on how you approach the task assigned or the kind of application that you want. You need to plan very thoroughly. If I would want to point one huge mistake I've done is I have not prepared ahead a lot more. I just draw some things and I start to develop. But now knowing the traps, and especially the ones in versioning with the database, then I realized this is where I could heavily improved. And I hope I did not overstate my welcome. and I did not consume too much of the time. Yeah, sure. Yeah, of course.
One sec, let me get my screen share. It's good that I have like so many talks related to local first in the chamber. Yeah. Cool. So thanks for having me. My name is Mauve. I'm a decentralized software consultant, and today I'm going to be talking to my approach for LLMs and the user agent. So at the moment, language models are more or less all going through the same cloud-based setup where a user is talking to some sort of front end, that front end is going to be talking to some sort of back end, and then that back end is going to be talking to some cloud-based LLM API. So that's great because that means that users don't need any GPUs set up, neither does the web app provider, and you can get these really big capable models without actually having to do much extra work. However, there are some downsides. Namely, if your app gets really popular, your costs are going to go up. And so oh, is my screen not sharing? Oh, is it sharing? Okay, great. Um, so if your app gets popular, your costs will spike. And then also there's no privacy. So anything that your users are sending to your backend is now going to be sent to the LLM provider backend. And they have privacy policies, but can you really trust um, a large company that has all of the incentives to violate it? So the alternative to that is to use local LLMs. And they are not great in that you do need to set up a GPU or have a beefy CPU or have lots of system resources. And typically, the models that you can run locally are going to be a lot less capable than the large cloud ones. But as someone deploying an application, you don't have to care about deployment costs at all because you can just dump them on the end user. And as well, for users that care about privacy, all data stays local. So if you're working, say, with high risk environments where you really need stuff on-prem, say like sensitive financial data, medical records, other things where it's a huge liability, this gives uh, a boost. The other thing is I believe that user agents should provide applications with powerful APIs while enabling user agency and choice. And with everything stuck behind cloud APIs, which are opaque to the user and usually not customizable, we're reducing user agency. So I thought, would it be cool if I could explore making local AI models available to web applications while preserving user control? So I created this new web API for my web browser Agrigor, which is pretty much modeled after the OpenAI HTTP endpoints, where you can send a series of messages and get the next message in a sequence, or do regular completions with a sequence of tokens. So this is the high-level API that pretty much all language model apps are going to be using in one way or another. But now, instead of it being an extra cloud API, it's controlled by the user. The way users can control it is by, first of all, just setting whether they want it supported or not. If a user doesn't want any AI stuff in any of the apps they use, they should have the option to just say, hey, I don't want to let you do that. As well, I left it open to the user to choose what sort of backend they want. So by default, I support using Olama, which is a local system service anyone can install on their machine. And then you can choose different models to run. I usually use Qwen 2.5 Coder because it's pretty smart for how small it is. But if a user really wants a cloud model, they have the option to supply that. Or if they want to use a community run cluster, they can do that. The point is we now decouple the choice of model from the application itself. So the use cases I have in mind. So Agrigor is a web browser mainly made for peer-to-peer, off-grid, local-first software. And I see this as a complement to those use cases, where we can have offline chatbots, which can use our local LLM-enabled workflows or use our local knowledge bases. They're also useful for doing basic translation tasks or rewording or summarizing. And as well, I've been experimenting with LLM-enabled web extensions in the browser without any extra APIs. So the models that I've been using have been mostly these three. Qwen 2.5 and Qwen 3 are great for doing coding tasks, especially at small levels. Microsoft's Phi series is also fairly decent. I would not recommend the Gemma series. They're small. Google's fancy. They have their really fancy like optimized mobile build, but I found that the personality is just kind of not great. It really glazes you up and just ends up being distracting rather than completing tasks. A cool alternative is the Hermes series of models, which are community curated, where they have open data sets that they apply on top of these foundation models in order to make them less corporate. As well, when you're building an application, there's some consideration to the actual size that you want to use. Usually, if you're running on consumer hardware, you're going to want to use 4-bit quantized versions of the models so you can actually fit them in RAM. If you have a 1B model or less, just don't bother using them. They will just spit out gibberish and it's not useful at all. At 3B, you have something that is capable of doing text transformation, maybe generating some small snippets, but it's not great for instruction following or complex logic. 7B models are good for code generation and basic logic following. This is also where you can start doing tool calling, but they get really distracted as your context grows. 70B models are generally the useful ones. This is where we start being able to actually compete with the cloud models, but this also requires having actually like strong hardware, which is not great. So I'm going to do a really quick demo of how I actually make use of these things locally. So as I mentioned before, Agrigor is a tool for building these off-grid local first apps. And one thing that you might encounter if you're off-grid and not connected to the internet is not having Google or Stack Overflow to help you. And so I made a small tool that uses local LLMs to generate code snippets. So here is the DWeb Scratchpad app. It's kind of like a JS Fiddle, but it publishes to peer-to-peer. And I want to add a new feature to it, but I'm not a great coder or I just forget the syntax. So I want to add a CSS filter that'll change the hue over time, and I want to apply it to this marquee tag I have. So instead of searching up docs and making sure I have them locally, I can hit this generate button and wait for, a few hours. And then bam, it spit out a bunch of CSS. I don't really know what this does, but I can take it, paste it, and now uh, I will have some sort of preview. Does it do something? Did it work? Ah, it's doing something. So usually what you need to do with these, so I ran this in a 3B model to make sure it could actually operate quickly, but sometimes they are not super smart and you will have to do a little bit of editing, but it is better than literally nothing. And at a recent event in Berlin, I actually semi-vibe coded an app where I forgot the syntax for getting camera access and connecting a camera to a video feed. And there's all these little code snippets that are really handy to have offline. Similarly, we have a little chat app, which is, the MVP for anything LLM related. And so these are all single page applications, which can be edited inside this CodePen style editor. And as you can see, it generated that text pretty fast. I'm going to be adding streaming support so you can see the one token at a time instead of waiting for it to buffer. But yeah, so that's kind of what I have for now. I believe that this is a better foundation than everyone using cloud models, even if the local APIs are backed by the cloud. And I think it's a useful companion for folks that are trying to get started with tech without having to be constantly dependent on these large centralized sources of information. So yeah, thank you.